At Gate B7 in Logan Airport, I found my son sitting on a hard plastic chair with my 5-year-old grandson asleep across his lap, one small backpack at his feet, and a boarding pass to nowhere in his hand. I said, "Why aren't you at the office?" He looked up, and I saw it immediately, not tears. Something worse. The hollow look of a man who has decided he no longer matters. Richard said people like us don't belong in rooms like theirs. I sat down next to him, looked at Tommy's face, peaceful and trusting even in a crowded terminal. I picked up the boarding pass. One way to Cincinnati. His mother's sister lived there. He was running. I folded it once and put it in my coat pocket. "Come with me," I said quietly. "But Dad, come with me." He didn't know what I'd spent 3 years building in silence. He didn't know that Richard Hargrove had been sitting in my chair the entire time without realizing it. By morning, that would change. Welcome to our channel. If this story speaks to something you've experienced, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another one. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. A note before we continue. This story blends real emotional experiences with fictional details for dramatic effect. Names, places, and certain events have been imagined, but the lessons about family, dignity, and the kind of power that truly matters, those are drawn straight from life. It was a Tuesday in November when I drove to Logan, 2 days before Thanksgiving. I'd gotten the call from Tommy's school, not from my son. The administrator said Tommy had been sitting in the office since noon, that no one had come. I knew something was wrong before I finished the sentence. My son Daniel had never once been late picking up that boy. Not in 5 years. I found them at the gate 40 minutes later. Daniel had bought Tommy a hot chocolate he hadn't touched. The cup was still wrapped in a napkin on the seat beside them, cold by then. Daniel's tie was loosened. His jacket was folded too carefully across his knee, the way a man folds things when he needs something to do with his hands. I sat down and waited. He'd tell me when he was ready. "Richard called a company meeting at 9 this morning," he finally said. Everyone was there, all 42 employees. He stood at the front of the conference room and said that Hargrove Consulting needed to realign its culture going forward. That certain people who didn't understand the firm's legacy, were holding it back. He paused. Then he looked directly at me and said, "Some doors open for people with the right foundation. Daniel, I think you know this one was never yours to walk through." The terminal buzzed around us. A flight to Denver was boarding 2 gates down. "Claire was in the room," he said. She didn't say anything. That part landed harder than the rest. His wife, 3 years of marriage. She had watched her brother publicly humiliate her husband in front of his colleagues and said nothing. "He had security walk me out," Daniel said. "I sat in the parking garage for 2 hours before I could drive. Then I picked up Tommy and I didn't know where to go. I looked at my grandson. Tommy had shifted in his sleep, one hand now loosely holding the collar of his father's shirt, the way small children hold on to the things they love without knowing they're doing it. "Grandpa?" Tommy stirred, eyes half open. "Right here, buddy." He looked at me with the complete and unquestioning trust that only very young children have. "Do you always fix things?" "Always," I said. "Go back to sleep." Daniel looked at me. "Dad, I don't want you to do anything. I know what you need," I said. "Tonight, you need your old bedroom and a meal. Tomorrow, you'll need the truth. Get your bag." We drove north out of the city. Tommy slept in the back seat. Daniel stared at the passenger window the whole way. The highway gave way to the smaller roads I'd driven for 30 years, past the stone walls and bare maple trees of Concord. My house sat at the end of a long gravel drive. The same house where Daniel had grown up, where I'd built everything and where I'd missed most of it. I'd built Mercer Property Group over 32 years. One warehouse in South Boston, purchased at auction in 1989 for less than I'd paid for my first car. Now it was 41 commercial properties across New England, with assessed value I never discussed at dinner tables. I was the kind of wealthy that doesn't announce itself. No fleet of cars, no charity galas with my name on the program. The people who needed to know, knew. The people who didn't. 4 years ago, when Daniel told me he was going to work for Richard Hargrove, I said very little. Richard had founded Hargrove Consulting on venture capital, and a family name that carried weight in Boston's financial corridors. He was Claire's older brother, 12 years her senior, the kind of man who treated every room like a stage built specifically for him. Daniel loved Claire and wanted to prove himself on his own terms, not as my son. I understood that. I'd once wanted the same thing at his age. So I made a decision. I didn't interfere, but I didn't stop watching either. Richard Hargrove was good at the visible parts of business, the pitch, the handshake, the keynote speech. What he was less good at was the invisible architecture that kept a company standing. I noticed the first crack 18 months in. Hargrove Consulting had signed a 10-year lease on their flagship office in the Seaport District. Premium address, floor-to-ceiling glass, a lobby that said, "We have arrived." What Richard hadn't known, because the ownership structure was layered through two holding companies, was that the building belonged to Mercer Property Group. I was his landlord. I said nothing. I kept the management company at arm's length and let the lease run as written. Then, 8 months ago, a larger crack appeared. Richard had landed a major contract with a regional healthcare network called Callaway Medical Partners. $12 million over 3 years, the largest deal in Hargrove Consulting's history. Richard threw a party. He put a press release out. He bought himself a new watch. What the press release didn't mention was that Callaway Medical Partners' board of directors included a silent advisory position held by a private investment group called Mercer Capital, LLC. I had been a quiet stakeholder in Callaway for 6 years, since their early expansion phase, long before Richard ever shook their CEO's hand. He had been building his crown on land I owned. I hadn't moved against him. I had no reason to. Daniel was working hard, learning the business, earning the team's respect in the quiet, steady way he'd always done things. He wasn't like Richard. Daniel didn't need a room to applaud him. He just needed to do good work and know it was good. I was proud of him in ways I hadn't told him often enough. But that Tuesday evening, after I'd made eggs and toast and sat with Tommy while Daniel finally slept, I called my attorney, James Whitfield. "I need a complete picture," I said. "Hargrove Consulting's financial obligations, their lease status, and anything tied to the Callaway contract renewal. All of it. By Thursday morning, Thanksgiving Eve," James said. "I'm aware. I'll have it by 8 a.m. I sat in my study after the call, the same room where Daniel had come to me at age 9 with a broken baseball glove, and at age 22 with the news that he'd gotten a job offer in New York and was afraid I'd be disappointed. I hadn't been. I'd been proud. I just hadn't said it clearly enough, or often enough, and we'd lost some years to that silence. The desk lamp threw a circle of light across old files. I opened the Hargrove folder I'd kept updated for 2 years, not out of suspicion at first, just habit. I read through it slowly, the way you read a document you're about to sign. James called at 7:45 Thursday morning, 15 minutes early. "You'll want to sit down," he said. I was already sitting. He walked me through it methodically. Hargrove Consulting had expanded aggressively in the past 18 months. 6 new hires, a second office in Providence, a rebrand that cost more than most small companies earn in a year. The Callaway contract had been used as collateral to secure a business line of credit, $4.3 million from a private lender. The credit line was currently drawn to 90%. Operating accounts showed less than 3 months of runway. "Richard has been pulling his own salary at twice the documented rate," James continued. "The bookkeeper flagged it internally 8 months ago. The flag was overruled by Richard." "The Providence office lease," I said. A pause. "Also, Mercer Property Group. He doesn't know. The Callaway renewal? Up for board review in January. If his performance metrics don't improve before year-end, they have a right of early exit." I set the phone on the desk and looked out the window. The backyard was November gray, the old elm tree bare, the tire swing Daniel had used as a boy hanging still and weathered from the lowest branch. Richard Hargrove had fired my son 2 days before Thanksgiving in front of 42 witnesses. He had humiliated him in a room full of people Daniel had worked beside for 3 years. He had framed it as a matter of breeding of Daniel not having the right foundation, the right name, the right blood. And he had done all of this while his company operated on land I owned, with its biggest client tied to capital I held, while he ran out of money with a smile on his face. He had no idea. I picked the phone back up. "James, I want the Callaway board briefed on the credit situation before January. Quietly, through proper channels, and review the lease agreement. I want to know every clause." "And the credit line lender?" I thought for a moment. "Who holds it?" "Coastal Venture Partners. Small fund. They've been trying to exit the position for months. Buy it, I said. At whatever discount they'll take. Silence. Then, you'll own his debt. By Monday, I said. Daniel didn't know any of this. He spent Thanksgiving helping Tommy make a pie from a recipe on the back of a can, flour on the counter, flour on Tommy's nose, the two of them completely absorbed in the task. I watched from the doorway. My son was going to be fine, more than fine, but he needed to know who he was first. And Richard Hargrove needed to understand the nature of the walls he'd been leaning against. The Hargrove family's annual tradition was the New England Business Leadership Dinner, held every first Friday of December at the Fairmont Copley Plaza. Richard had attended every year for a decade. This year, he was scheduled to receive the Regional Innovator Award from the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. He had made sure everyone in his network knew about it. The invitation sat on his assistant's desk for 2 weeks before it went out. He had approved the seating chart personally. I had attended the dinner twice before, both times at the invitation of clients. I was not on Richard's list. I made a call to the Chamber's executive director, a woman named Patricia Solis, who had sat across from me on a nonprofit board for 6 years. I told her I'd like to attend as a supporter, and that I'd be making a significant pledge to their small business development fund that evening. She said she'd be delighted to seat me. The week before the dinner, I met with Daniel. I sat him down in the study and laid out the folders James had prepared. I took my time. I explained the properties, the Callaway connection, the debt I now held on his company's credit line. I watched his face move through the information, disbelief, then a slow, settling comprehension, then something I hadn't expected. Not anger, grief. 3 years, he said quietly. Yes. He was working inside something you already owned. Yes. He looked at the files for a long time without speaking. Outside, Tommy was in the yard, kicking leaves, his breath visible in the cold air. I need you to understand something, I said. I didn't do any of this to protect you from failure. I did it because I wanted to be close to something important to you without getting in the way. The Callaway connection was years before you and Claire were even together. The lease was circumstance. I didn't engineer this. I just didn't step back from it either. He nodded slowly. And now, I said, Richard made it personal. He didn't just let you go, he tried to define you in front of your colleagues. He tried to make you believe it. And I watched your face at the airport, and I think part of you did believe it. I paused. That part is what I'm going to address. How? By making sure that the next time someone sits across from him and asks about his foundation, I said, he'll know exactly who's been holding the floor up. The Friday of the dinner, I drove into Boston alone. Daniel was with Tommy, which was where he needed to be. I wore a charcoal suit I'd had for years, nothing remarkable. I arrived early, before the cocktail hour filled, and found my table near the back left, not the power positions along the front. Not the seats that signaled arrival, just a good clear sightline to the stage and to the room. Richard came in at 6:45 with Claire on his arm and 2 colleagues I recognized from the Hargrove website. He moved through the cocktail crowd the way he always did, hand extended before he was fully in range, laugh landing a beat too early. Claire was elegant in a dark green dress, her smile practiced and even. She scanned the room twice for threats, I always thought, rather than people she was glad to see. She didn't see me. The room was full and I wasn't looking for her attention. At 7, the lights signaled dinner. At 7:30, James Whitfield texted me 2 words. It's done. The credit line notification had gone out that afternoon. Hargrove Consulting's primary lender was now Mercer Capital, LLC. Richard would have seen the paperwork by close of business. I watched him check his phone at the table. Once, then again. He tilted the screen away from Claire and read something. His hand moved to straighten his fork on the table. A small, unnecessary adjustment. He leaned toward the colleague on his left and said something brief and quiet. The colleague shook his head. Richard picked up his water glass and set it back down without drinking. He knew. At 8:15, Patricia Solis took the podium for the award presentation. The room applauded as she read through the nominee biography. Building from the ground up. Innovative vision. A legacy of leadership. Richard straightened in his chair. He was ready. This was what the year had been building toward, in his version of the story. Patricia paused at the microphone. Before I invite our honoree to the stage, I'd like to note a very generous pledge made this evening to our Small Business Development Fund, which supports first-generation entrepreneurs across Greater Boston. She smiled toward my table. Thank you, Mr. Mercer, for your continued commitment to this community. 300 heads turned, including Richard's. He saw me. And in the 2 or 3 seconds before his expression reset, I saw him understand. Not everything, not yet, but enough. He recognized that something had shifted in the architecture of the evening, and he didn't know when I'd arrived or how long I'd been watching. I nodded once. He looked away. Patricia called his name. He walked to the stage. His acceptance speech was shorter than I suspected he'd planned. His voice was steady. Richard was too disciplined to falter in public, but the rhythm was off, the pauses a half-beat too long. He thanked the chamber. He thanked his team. He thanked his family. He did not look at my table. Afterward, during the dessert course, he came to me. Claire was not with him. He crossed the room alone and stood at the edge of my table. The 2 men I'd come with, James and an old colleague named Pete, who'd known Richard by reputation, went quiet. Walter, he said. The use of my first name was calculated to signal equality. I didn't know you were a chamber member. I support what they do, I said. Please sit down. He sat. Up close, the confidence was a coat he was wearing deliberately now, rather than something natural. His jaw was tight. I received some paperwork today, he said. I know. Mercer Capital. Yes. You've been my landlord for 4 years, he said. Both locations. Yes. A beat. And Callaway? I've been on their advisory board since their Series B. Long before your contract. He looked at the tablecloth. I let the silence sit. I'd like to discuss a he finally said. The credit line terms if there's room for a conversation about. There is no conversation about the credit line tonight, I said. Not here. His mouth tightened. Then what is this? This, I said, is me letting you know where you've been standing. You built your firm inside a structure I own, with capital adjacent to mine, and you fired my son by telling him his foundation wasn't good enough. I kept my voice even, the way I'd kept it for 30 years, in rooms far more contentious than this one. I want you to understand that the foundation you've been criticizing belongs to the man whose lease you're on. He was quiet for a long moment. Around us, the dinner went on. Glasses lifted, conversations flowing, the ordinary sound of people who didn't know that a world was being quietly rearranged at a table near the back. What do you want? He said. I want Daniel reinstated with a formal written apology to him and to every employee who was in that conference room. I want his title corrected to reflect the work he has actually been doing, not the ceiling you imagined for him. And I want Claire to have a conversation with her husband, one that she chooses to have, not one I've arranged. I folded my napkin on the table. The lease terms and the credit line are separate conversations. I'm a fair creditor. You'll get fair terms. But the personal debt, what you said to my son in that room, that one you pay yourself. He left the table without another word. I watched him cross the room back to his wife. He leaned close and said something to her. She looked toward me once, quickly, then looked away. I finished my coffee and stayed through the end of the dessert course. There was nothing dramatic to see. The machine had already been set in motion. It would run on its own now. I said goodnight to Patricia, thanked James, and drove home through the dark back roads of Concord. The lights in the kitchen were on when I arrived. Daniel was at the table with a cup of tea and a book he wasn't reading. He looked up when I came in. How was it? He asked. Quiet, I said. I put my keys on the counter. He'll call you Monday. Daniel nodded slowly. He turned the book over in his hands. Dad, I don't want to go back there. I sat down across from him. This surprised me, and I let it show. I've been thinking since Thanksgiving, he said. Even if Richard apologizes, even if the title changes, I'd be walking back into a room where those 42 people watched me get walked out by security. He shook his head. That's not a foundation you rebuild on. He was right, and the fact that he could see it clearly, without bitterness, just as a practical truth, told me more about who he'd become than any courtroom victory could. Then, what do you want? I asked. He looked at the table for a moment. You've got 41 properties, he said. I know almost nothing about real estate, but I've spent 3 years learning operations, client management, and how businesses actually run day to day. I thought I was learning it for Hargrove. A quiet, almost smile. Turns out I might have been learning it for you. I didn't answer immediately. I looked at him the way I should have looked at him more often, not as the boy in the Little League uniform I'd been too busy to watch. Not as the son I'd sent into the world too early to prove something, but as the man sitting across from me now. Steady, clear, ready. Come in Monday, I said. We'll start with the Providence building. Ironically, it's one of ours. He laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd heard from him in weeks, and it filled the kitchen the way Tommy's laughter filled every room he walked into. 2 weeks passed. Richard called Daniel on a Monday, as I said he would. He offered reinstatement. Daniel declined, graciously, and recommended 2 colleagues he thought were ready for expanded roles. The apology letter went to the staff on a Wednesday stiff, carefully worded, but real. Claire called Daniel once. A brief call he described to me as honest in a way she hadn't been in years. They were going to have longer conversations. That would take time. Those things always do. The Callaway renewal came up for review in January. With the credit situation disclosed to the board, Richard agreed to renegotiate the contract scope to something his current capacity could actually support. Smaller, more sustainable, possibly survivable, if he ran things more honestly going forward. That wasn't my concern anymore. On a Saturday in the second week of December, I drove back to Logan Airport, not to meet anyone. I just needed to pass through that part of the city for a meeting nearby. I parked and walked through the terminal for a few minutes. I found gate B7, the same gate, the same hard plastic chairs, the same low ceiling. I stood there for a moment and thought about Daniel sitting in that chair with Tommy asleep across his lap in a one-way boarding pass to nowhere. A man who had started to believe what someone else said about him. I thought about how close it had come to him walking onto that flight, taking Tommy away from his school and his bedroom and his grandfather's backyard and his tire swing. How quietly a life can be redirected by a person with enough authority and enough contempt and enough confidence that no one will push back. I am 63 years old. I have been in rooms where the stakes were enormous and held my position. I have signed contracts that shifted entire city blocks. I have been, by most measures, successful. And the truest thing I know about success is this: it is worth nothing, precisely nothing, if you are not in the right place when your child needs you. I miss games. I miss dinners. I miss the ordinary accumulation of hours that is the actual substance of a relationship. And I told myself that the work I was doing was for them, which was partly true and mostly a way of avoiding the harder work of showing up. I built Daniel a future and spent too little time in his present. When Richard Hargrove told him his foundation wasn't enough, part of the reason Daniel believed it, however briefly, was because I had spent years being a foundation he could feel but not see. That is my honest accounting. The Monday after the chamber dinner, before Daniel came into the office, I sat with Tommy at breakfast. He had a small wooden puzzle he'd been fighting with for 2 days, a picture of a fire truck with 50 pieces, and a missing corner I'd already looked for twice. He pushed it toward me across the kitchen table without looking up. "I can't do the wheels," he said. I studied the arrangement. The lower left quadrant was upside down, which meant the wheels were actually in the right location, he just had them flipped. I turned 3 pieces over and slid them back into place. The wheel appeared. Tommy looked at it, then at me. "How'd you do that?" he said. "Sometimes things are already in the right place," I said. "They just need to be turned over." He considered this with the complete seriousness of a 5-year-old evaluating new information. Then he went back to the puzzle, working the pieces with a different angle now, turning each one before forcing it. "Do you always fix things?" he asked without looking up. "Not always," I thought. Not the years I spent at my desk when I could have been here. Not the game I missed. The dinner I shortened. The call I returned 2 days late because the contract was more urgent in that moment. Not those things. Those are the broken edges I carry. But this, I thought, looking at his bent head, the small hands working the pieces, this I can do right. "I try, buddy," I said. "I always try." There is a particular kind of man who measures his life in what he has built, square footage, annual revenue, the number of doors that open when he gives his name. I was that man for a long time, and I am not ashamed of it, because the building mattered and the work was real. But buildings are not a legacy. They are an address. Legacy is the way your son walks into a room after 3 years of being told he doesn't belong and holds the room anyway. It's the way he fires the employee who took bribes and doesn't hesitate, not because he's hard, but because he's fair. It's the way he reads the same bedtime story 4 nights in a row because Tommy keeps asking for it, and each time he reads it like it's the first time because his son is watching his face, not listening to the words. Legacy is the thing you pass down not through a will, but through every ordinary moment when someone is paying attention and you show them what right looks like. Richard Hargrove told my son that foundation was inherited. He was wrong. Foundation is built, one decision at a time, in the places no one is applauding you, in the rooms where the stakes are your own dignity, and no one is watching except a 5-year-old who believes you can fix anything. I gave Daniel the answer to that on a Tuesday in November in Terminal B. He gave me back something I didn't know. I was missing the chance to finally be present for someone I love, in the right place at the right time, not building a future, but standing inside one. If you've stayed with me through this story, I want to ask you honestly, have you been building for your family or with them? There's a difference, and I learned it. Leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if this found you at the right time. God doesn't give us these moments by accident. The morning I drove to that airport, I was already thinking about a board call I had at 3. I almost sent my assistant. I am grateful, with everything in me, that I went myself instead. That I was the one sitting in that chair when Tommy woke up and asked his question. Because some questions, you need to be there to answer. And some things, if you show up, you can still fix.